Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. The Chinese belligerence in the oceans is something that we spoke about. Today, I'm going to talk about the fact that have the Chinese got stuck in the oceans, and what is his plan going to be going forward? With someone I've spoken multiple times before about the oceans and maritime affairs, Dr. Pooja Bhatt. Find her views to be very balanced, and the kind of discussions that we have over here are very easy for a lot of people to understand. And that's the commentary I've got. Dr. Madam, thank you so much for taking the time out once again. It's always a pleasure talking to you and sharing and learning from you because you've got the keen eye towards maritime affairs. And let's see what you have to say about some questions that I had about China.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for having me again, Adi. And it's always a wonderful opportunity to talk to you and discuss all these issues with you. So I'm looking forward to it.
Let's take the trivial thing up first. What's up with the Chinese spy ship back in the Indian Ocean? A lot of people talk about, oh, it's spying on Indian missiles. Some people, and I find that voice very small, some people say it's mapping because it's trying to fix up his own navigational system, which is Baidu, which has not been able to come into full picture. I spoke to a couple of maritime sailors and stuff like that and told me, you're joking, we'll never use that for parking or anything like that. It's not accurate. So, having said that, Wang Yang 6, Wang Yang 5, and I think they've got Wang Yang to 1 to 10.
7.
7. Okay, my apologies. What are they doing within the Indian Ocean? Why do they come back again and again?
Yeah, so it's quite interesting the timing. Every time we have either Wang Yang 5, 6, or 7 coming in Indian Ocean, and largely that coincides with the time when India is about to do a major missile test or has done a missile test. When each time, and I think it started happening when Arihan did the first nuclear missile, some kind of testing way back in 2020, 21. And I think that was the first time we had seen Wang Yang, I think 5 in our waters. And
Yeah.
since then, every time we have a test coming up in Sriharikota, in the Bay of Bengal, we generally end up seeing the presence of these so-called research vessels just before of like within a few days before the test or just after the test. So largely one of the conclusions that a lot of analysts try and make is it's just to understand the capability of Indian missile system, which makes a lot of sense that they would want to learn about how India is going ahead with its satellite system, missile system, how much capable India is in terms of these systems, what are the processes India is following. A lot of technical issues that China can, information, they can gather a lot of information on these issues. So I think that can be one of the reasons. Another argument that simultaneously comes every time these ships are there because they come up with these huge radars on them and huge coverage basically they can have. So other kind of argument that comes that they might be snooping on Indian major cities
Nuclear.
or nuclear facilities, larger cities with grids and all these infrastructure, critical infrastructure. They might be snooping in that. That might not be true because again there's a argument by the defense analyst that comes is that we also have certain capabilities for blocking these kind of radars and missiles. You are listening to both the side. I'm sure only the defense people would know, and only a very small coterie of people would know how true, what is the what is the extent of veracity of these arguments are. So that can be other thing that they might be trying to snoop within Indian systems, and I am not sure how much capable they are in doing that or how much information they're actually getting. Third is what is to be said is they might be doing some underwater surveys and kind of to understand the undersea activities and all for their own. That might not be true because the nature of ships do not seem to be doing the kind of uh, the whatever radars and systems are there. They need sonars for that. So I'm not sure if they have that kind of sonar system on that which can do undersea surveillance, and this something remains debatable. So we are not very much sure how much undersea surveillance are they doing. So largely, we have all, even this time when Wang Yang had come, we had this Sriharikota test where India was ISRO was carrying out the Singaporean, satellites on them. So I think that's another level of doing it. So it's just not the military Agni 5, Agni 6 tests that they try and follow, but also the commercial ventures that we are doing. I think that they also follow. So overall, that is the entire idea of them being present in the Indian Ocean during the. So you can relate these timings more or less. Every time we have a test coming up, or every time we have something big coming up, we have a Wang Yang coming up and snooping around to understand what's going on.
I mean, I'm not the greatest expert in defense, but very common sense tells me if I'm going to switch on my radars to track something, I'm going to emit a signal. The minute I emit a signal, I'm also my frequency is also noted, and they can be jammed, and they can be fluffed, and they can be filled up with a lot of ting 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 voices. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
that can also be done, and I believe
So
that's what was done with the Bangyang 5 that came across, and you kind
yeah,
of referred to it. Yeah, please,
yeah.
you wanted to say something.
Yeah, correct. I'm just was just saying the same thing that when last time we had Wang Yang at Sri Lanka and it was parked outside Hambantota. It was largely said that we also had our ships parked there, which were doing these radar noise cancellation activities. So basically, they were blocking they were acting as jammers for those radars. So yeah, so we are also, I think, doing the counter activities to balance that out in the Indian Ocean.
I find it quite interesting that they would need to send a ship like that, which can be seen from 1,000 miles. Uh, Hypothetically speaking, these damn things are being tracked right outside the straits of Sunda or Malacca. As soon as they just put their nose out, and everybody knows in India, okay, this thing is coming in.
Yeah.
So it's quite funny that they keep doing this, knowing just the factor that this is happening. How do you see the navigation part of it? Do you see them mapping the oceans for, I don't think it's minerals, but mapping the oceans for waypoints and stuff like that?
It's been largely said. So I am also in two minds about it because there is an equal amount of data that comes out. In terms of saying that they are doing hydrographic surveys, which they need to
Mm.
do it, but also the kind of vessels they are sending. They do not seem to be equipped with undersea surveillance kind of infrastructure that they should have. So I'm not sure if they are doing it because they can always use it. Their submarines, which can go undetected all the time and do the same activity
Yeah,
way
yeah,
better way.
exactly.
Like, why
Hmm.
do they need a research vessel for the same? So you're right. To have a research vessel in an ocean, which is absolutely noticeable by everyone and anyone from the time it just crosses Malacca and Sunda. Why would they want to do it, so visibly, making so much of noise around? It's just maybe creating a hype factor because otherwise nothing justifies that. It's just to show that Chinese research vessels are there and they cannot be stopped because international maritime allows them to be in high seas and everywhere, and they can do the research. So they're there. I think they're just pushing the boundaries of laws and the established norms which are there, and just trying to push people to see how far that goes. But otherwise, it just add up and just doesn't make sense, as you said. If you're being tracked, you're being tracked. So what difference are you making? Like, you can just do the same activity using a submarine. Why are you doing it so visibly if you don't want to push some boundaries of some people? So that's how I would see it. Otherwise, I can't add it up. I don't have any other theory to add up.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Why would you want to showcase yourself when you're doing something like that? It just doesn't make sense. You're trying to irritate someone, trying to, I don't know.
Like, why would you have a person have a why would you want to have a spy looking like a spy in the open air and doing the spying? Why?
Yeah,
Like,
that's like me being a
spies.
Pakistani or Chinese spy and trying to tell you, okay, I'm a spy. Now you do an interview with me. I mean, it's stupid.
So yeah, I mean, Try and add it
Yeah,
up. I just
it
like
doesn't make
that.
sense. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. Absolutely. But how do you see him in the oceans today? I mean, 2 years ago, there was a whole narrative that was being run across by the West, even by us, our media, that, oh, Chinese are in the ocean. They're doing South China Sea has become what? The Chinese lake, uh, you know, uh, this and that and the other. But today, uh, before I get into the my main point, I want to ask you a comment about this whole Chinese lake conversion to an American lake. Would you firstly agree with something like that before I actually come to the point and ask you about the Chinese being locked into the oceans? But would you agree to the terminology change where it was known as a Chinese lake and it's now a Chinese lake with the Americans in it?
Yeah, you're right. Means now it's no longer a Chinese lake, because now we have not just Americans coming in, but all other countries, ASEAN countries, India, and other countries who want to be in the. So I think it's a huge pushback, and I don't think China would, even if they want to call it, keep calling it Chinese backwaters or Chinese, area of influence or whatever. I don't think, if you see practically, that is the case. You have way too many actors, especially Americans, and the more Chinese shout on top of the voice that this is our area, our waters, more you see Chinese American bases popping up everywhere or across. So yeah.
Which is what is interesting to me, that they built up these islands. They spent, I think, billions and billions of dollars building up islands about 150 miles off their coast. Uh, Fair enough. You need to have an island 150 miles off your coast to protect yourself. What sense does that make? That's up to you. You wanted to dominate a certain region. When you see the map of that, when you actually see the map of that, is the Paracels and the Spratlys, which are towards the southwest. Like the main action of the South China Sea is towards the southeast,
Southeast.
which is where the Taiwan and all that tamasha is there. The Spratlys and Paracels are kind of tucked towards one another corner, not close to the Taiwan area, which is what brings me to a very interesting question. You see the South China Sea today; it's hemmed in with American bases, right? You've got let's start from the Koreas. You've got South Korea, Japan, Okinawa, Guam. I mean, I'm sure there's a little tingle somewhere in the middle which
Philippines.
the Americans are not. I'm
and
talking about those secret little bases that the Americans have. Some
and now
listening posts in the
Philippines.
middle of the oceans. For Philippines and Malaysia. There's some talk of, as a matter of fact, that the Vietnamese now want to talk to the Americans. Vietnamese is we are sending them ships. So there's just that militarization of the South China Sea which is happening. Before I again take the entire Chinese picture of the two ocean strategy, which will be my next question, how do you see the American positioning against China in the South China Sea itself? Does he feel like he probably doesn't have a clean way out anymore, which wasn't that great before either? But how do you see the situation today?
Yeah, definitely the American presence in terms of both bases and more and more ships coming, and you have a special Indo-PACOM force now for the same region. I think that has definitely made a Chinese position very difficult. So I think I just start with addressing one of the issues that you started with earlier about why China has all those bases which are unsinkable, which are sinkable basically. After, if you have a war, you can these are small islands, artificial islands, one huge bomb and they can sink. The idea is not to get so basically, yes, you do get a force multiplier when you have a base more than 400 nautical miles from your Hainan base. You have that kind of force multiplier presence in the deep in the ocean. That is there, but idea is not only to keep a force multiplier base there. The idea is to uh, start claiming those islands on the. So basically there is a regime within UNCLOS, and I just take a minute to explain that. So under
Please.
UNCLOS, United Nations Convention of the Seas, there is a convention called regime of the island. Regime of the island says that every rock in the ocean, every landform cannot be called an island. To be called an island, And only islands can claim territorial waters, and after certain categories, they can only call they can have easy. All right. So in that, and also every rock means everything that can just submerge in during high tide cannot be called island. Also, there are criterias for that. This it sets up criteria for every island. So, based on that, if most of these are artificial islands, they are no, they can. If you don't have those artificial building up, on the islands, they can might as well submerge during high tide, and they need to be refilled every few months so that they can sustain over this, high seas, high tide. So now what has happened is only if you can if there is a landform which can sustain above high tide can be called an island, and also it has to sustain some kind of life in terms of plants and humans and animals. It should be able to sustain some kind of economic activities for a sustained amount of time. So there are three criterias, and on these basis of three criteria only then you can claim a territorial water. So the idea is not to have a forward base entirely, but also have human presence. So when you build up the bases, you send up people there, you set up villages there, you have military there, you are doing some kind of chota mota economic activity, and based on that, you can claim, okay, now this is an island under UNCLOS, and because it's an island, it can claim its territorial waters and also claim its EEZ. You understand? So till now, the entire idea of negating the entire claim of by that was done by the PCA verdict in 2016 in the South China Sea, that none of these are true islands, and that's why China cannot claim any waters based on the island regime. So now China is trying to reverse that. They're saying, yes, these are islands. They have humans. It has economic activity going on. So I will claim territorial waters. I will claim EEZ. And once I have EEZ, I have certain, control over it. I would not allow any ship to go through it without my permission or whatever the rules are there. So you understand that that's the idea. So I just wanted to address that point, that this is one of the reasons that China wants to remain its control over and presence over Spratly and Paxil Islands. Okay, now coming to the American position, then you're right. I completely agree to with what you said, that it has made Chinese life really difficult in terms of seeing bases all over. And we also
Hmm.
spoken about how China and the in the last episode we spoke about how China has tried to take a step over it and directly go to Pacific Islands and islands beyond it, so that they can jump over the Chinese bases and have
Yeah.
their control
Yeah.
beyond that. So I think that's the kind of remedy they are trying to do. So I think what has happened in this, China-US game, China has really got stuck with its larger maritime vision. So basically, the entire vision was, being a global maritime power by 2050, having sea line of communication under my own control, having sea trade in my own control. I think that will get constricted because you have more American presence now. So yes, you're right when you say that the entire two sea strategy of China and entire Chinese maritime vision has got restricted. That would be correct to say at the moment. I am not sure what China can do because nobody can predict China, as if we have already spoken about it. But yes, whenever it comes out with something, it will be very drastic. So maybe another war, maybe another crisis of some kind of activity which will just break the status quo and do some kind of revisionism in the maritime domain. This is what is only expected.
And that's a bit scary because, when you're talking about a country which is kind of so
You blocked
बोलते हैं
basically.
ना इमोशनल है ये बहुत ज्यादा इमोशनल बोलते हैं इसको बहुत ज्यादा इमोशनल है ये सोचता नहीं है so anyways I mean when you come to a country like that when you look at the overall picture today what is the Chinese strategy to become a superpower is the two ocean strategy and I think we've hinted upon this in one of our talks. Now when you talk about a two ocean strategy that means he needs to have access to two oceans. um, One could be the Pacific and second could be the Indian Ocean.
Yeah.
Now, Pacific, we've spoken about, is completely blocked up. Indian Ocean, well, the direct access, we know, as we spoke about the spy ships, and that's one of the reasons why I brought up the spy ship. is just to kind of bring the viewers into shape that they're not free in this area. It's not a free run for them that they can just waltz in, dance around, and go back. They're going to be tracked, chased,
Correct.
even in some cases. So when you see that, you look at the outings that the Chinese have towards the south. You've got the Indian standing on the northern border of his. He tried breaking that chain, getting into the Arabian Sea through Pakistan. Of course, Pakistan is a dumbfounded cause. He tried coming into the Bay of Bengal through the port in Myanmar, the China Myanmar economic corridor through the Kaikfu area. That is, of course, blocked up. Myanmar and, of course, our presence in that area, it doesn't give him the free movement. So the Arabian Sea is blocked. The Bay of Bengal is blocked. The South China Sea is blocked. His borders are blocked in Ladakh and in Arunachal. Russia is not something that he can break out into. It's not very hospitable terrain, no matter how close friends he is with the Russians. He's now trying to go into Afghanistan and come down into Iran and down into the ocean, where he will see the Americans with a big smile and a salute with their CENTCOM. How do you see his position today? Every time you kind of observe it, you kind of find the anti-China alliance just hemming him to him, closing into him. How do you see this position, and what do you think they are talking about when they see this? Or have they even spoken about this as a concise picture?
I think they have very much realized that they are being, surrounded by everywhere. They have triggered this huge anti-China, parade basically against them, and every country is now, even if they're not speaking about it, they are preparing themselves against China in whatever ways, militarily or hedging or whatever. So they are trying to do it. One of the things that China has done, I think, if you would notice in the recent months, is so they just try to, have toned down on their wolf warrior energy, the speeches that were coming out by their top leaders in the recent times about everyone, in the world. And I think that's one of the factors of realization that they are that wolf warrior diplomacy is causing them much harm than doing them good. So that is one thing. Another thing that China has been doing recently is engaging countries in more multilateral formats, taking them away from the military, this thing, but multilaterally, they're trying to engage countries on the issues, both economic issues, but also they're trying to participate more on the issues such as economics, anti-terrorism, and issues which were not Chinese forte till now. But China is trying to build up an alternate narrative per se, that it can lead international world order, an alternate international world order, which is not which is very unlike US or unlike Western. So I think though, so you basically, the military map that you're showing here again says that even though militarily China is being stuck, I think politically and diplomatically and multilaterally it's trying to push even harder now. And if you've seen the recent speeches in the International Maritime Security Conference that happened in Singapore, and then after that we had Shangri-La dialogue again. The defense ministers came, and the defense minister came and said the same thing. China is looking for making an alternate world order, and we look at security as a different perspective, and we want to bring the global security initiative, global development initiative, global civilizational initiative. So now they're trying to hit differently than just militarily. If you try to understand, so it's not the only military purpose that they have, the way of hitting at US. They're trying other ways where US used to dominate till now and the West used to dominate till now to hit back.
I mean, that's very interesting. Do you think this whole narrative of being the number one and stuff like that is just a narrative, just to kind of I don't know how to put this over, just to irritate the world. Oh, I'm coming, knowing very well that you're not there. I mean, I don't think you'll ever get there. Why is this constant?
So much of effort towards narrative building, you mean to say, right? I think that is also something China has learned from the West, that if you have to create narrative for everything that you do to get accepted, and that's the only way to go about it. And that is what China is replicating through narrative building. So till now, whatever used to be the Western world order, which was led by the US and the Europe, which was very capitalist, which was very war oriented, which was very game theory based, means one will win, one will lose, win lose, kind of strategy. China is saying, I am trying to build up a world order which does not depend on the game strategy. I want to build up a world order which looks at security more than defense. So security about food security, security if you talk about other economic security, other kind of cultural security and everything. So I think that is a kind of narrative it's trying to build itself to be more acceptable. Narratives are made to make your strategies and plan more acceptable, and that's what China is doing. It's not playing a new game, it's just playing the game that US had been playing, just using US as a target now.
Funny thing is, USA during his ascent wouldn't have ever come out and said, "Oh, I'm the global superpower." You bloody well listen to me. I mean, that's not. I don't see any statement from any US leader saying that, "Bhai, I'm the big dog in the world now." Enough. So
You're
it's a
correct, you're
self
correct.
validation is what I'm asking. If नहीं 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 यार, we are going, हम पहुंच जाएंगे यार. Don't worry. ये देख बोल रहा है वो पहुंच जाएंगे. It's to me it seems like more self validation. I'm not being a China critic here, but just trying to understand their thought process.
Yeah, so for a country that thinks themselves that they are middle kingdom, the world starts from me. I am the center of the world. So every thought, every action follows from that thinking. The moment you start thinking the world starts from me, you will consider everyone as your someone who has to listen to you or follow your views. So I think it's that kind of strategy China is using, that even if you see their negotiation styles, they negotiate from the position of power. If the kind of narrative that they will try and put, gesture, as you said, they will say, listen to me, I am the one who's right, I am the next global power, just the dialogues like this, something which comes from state or civilization which is too sure of themselves. Not that they are actually sure of themselves. I think they are more insecure than sure of themselves. But that insecurity is calling for, until the time I would not put up a brave face in front of my own people, because you need to be domestically accepted also.
Yep.
Remember that, right? So I think that narrative is not just for the international public, but also for the domestic public. They need to, the Xi Jinping has to justify why is he putting so much of money in military and other things when the economy isn't shit. The economy is really bad.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
have employment so high, you have food prices so high, you have natural disasters going on. How would you convince your people to support you? You have to build a narrative. You have to show yourself that you were a victim sometime and now you want to come back to your glory. We were a great glorious power, and for that US is being our enemy, and they are being the hindrance, and they want war, we don't want war, just want to grow. So narrative building again.
Little pool or me, you know.
So that's how I would see it.
Also interesting when you see the reaction of, and I'm going to say the CCP. By the way, I called the CC. I got really bad hits for that. I in one show turned around and said CCP सब कुछ copy तो करता है, तो इसका नाम cut copy paste रख देते हैं. So I got a lot of backlash for that. So and I said, yeah, chalo, theek hai. Let's now every China show I'm going to start saying CCP.
Okay.
Jokes apart, how with what's happening within China, you just had four of the and I've covered this extensively with various different angles. When we look at this sort of a situation within the Chinese strategic kind of outlook towards the oceans, you've got the Chinese firing the four admirals within the rocket force, a senior general from the strategic support force. Here, any guy would say, यार ऐसा है मैं फंसने वाला हूँ, let me get my military in shape. ठीक है. I mean, it's very Stalinistic of him to kind of start chopping heads from the top. One of the reasons that the Russian army or the Soviet army could not stand up to the Germans in the first part of the attack during 1941, the Operation Barbarossa, because he took off all the heads. I mean, there was no one to lead. By the time it was only 2 3 years, 2.5 years, people learned and became generals again, and then started fighting back. Here's a guy who's doing this to his armed forces. How do you see this, especially as part of the navy? Because see, you can say it's just the strategic support force. ऐसा नहीं होता यार, जब एक एडमिरल गिरता है ना, हर जगह न्यूज आती है. It's not something which is that small. How do you see this having an impact on his maritime preparedness?
That's a good question. So I think I'll just again go back to the context of it. Xi Jinping's basically purging of senior military and political leaders started when he took over in 2014 itself. So he said there's a huge corruption and we need to weed out the corruption. So the leaders have to be. So in that garb, he actually removed a lot of people. I think one of the reasons was to take away that power that these generals and political leaders had gathered because of their position. So he wanted to break those centers of power. So he understood that there are certain leaders, there are certain military leaders and political leaders who had gathered way too much of power, and they can, in turn, stand up against Xi Jinping. So that was the one reason that he started, purging them out. Another thing was, I think, what is also speculation largely, and there might be certain value to it, that China, so some of these leaders, Chinese military leaders, understood that the kind of overhauling or kind of development or the kind of output that Xi Jinping is expecting is way too fast, way too much for military. Military cannot be prepared in 2 years. You take years of training and experience to prepare a particular force. And I think this the way Xi Jinping was going on building up, buying up new weapons, building up new weapons, and building up bigger armies. I think the leaders, the military leaders, also understood that we cannot go that fast, and I'm sure they must have voiced it out sometime or other. We don't know what went behind it, but I'm sure, just as in India we have, or any other country, that when the military leaders go back and inform the political leaders that, see, this is what you expected, but we cannot go that fast, or we need time, or I'm sure that kind of thing also wouldn't have been liked by Xi Jinping, and that would have been other the reason that why so many of them were purged out. And also, you made a very good point that a lot of these military leaders who have been given the most prominent position currently are naval journals, naval officers, basically. So these admirals have been, promoted to the South China Fleet, Rocket Force, and all the key positions within the military. I think one of the reasons is that China's more maritime forward approach now. So they want leaders with more maritime vision to be heading it. I'm not sure how good or bad this is an idea. I'm sure it must be a bad idea to have a admiral, heading a rocket force, basically. But yes, these are the kind of changes Xi Jinping is making to try and give more maritime kind of approach to his entire vision in terms of security aspects. So I think yeah. So basically, yeah. That's what the question was. Yeah, I think I've answered
The
that.
battle is in the sea, huh?
So basically, they understand the battle is in the sea, and they need more maritime forward leaders and leaders who can follow Xi Jinping to the T. So if he says, "I need aircraft carrier built and developed in next 2 years," I think any naval officer in the entire world will say aircraft carrier cannot be. It can be built in 2 or 5 years, but
यार,
having it
बनाने को आप 5 दिन में
operational
बना लो, कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है.
but having it
ठीक है, फिर
operational
Yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right? So having it operational takes years and years and decade of training. So I think people who will be like, yes, sir, we can just start your aircraft carrier tomorrow. I think they are the ones who may be heading it. And I don't think that it's a very good scene for China then if they're having so many yes men.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Three bags full, sir.
Correct. So I know this is a good thing for the world then. They don't need to.
Yeah, you know what? I I'll kind of deviate from you a little bit because I'd rather have a strong China where I can predict him rather than a buffoonery filled China, which is going to be difficult to predict because this what is happening is simple buffoonery. I mean, it's if for the lack of a better word, because you don't do that. I mean, you have corruption cases, fair enough. Get them to your office, dress them down, pretty get them one by one to go. Why do you take out four chaps at the same time? What is the kind of message that you're sending to the world that yeah, my generals are all corrupt. I just threw them out.
Correct.
Buddy, you're not running your
It
country
actually
properly.
brings down your morale of the entire force
Yeah, yeah,
basically.
yeah.
So I know it's not a good
No,
scene, but as we agree, like disagreed last time also, I don't see it as a buffoonery. I just see it continuing effort to remain unpredictable. That I would want to remain unpredictable because the more unpredictable I am, more scary I am to the world, and more it's I will look more scary and I'll get more, less of retaliation. The more they I'll start looking more predictable to the world, and they would know next of my move. I think the entire card of whatever house of cards will come down immediately.
I guess I'm being, when I say buffoonery, I guess I'm being a bit normal, and you're literally reading the Chinese mind. Uh, so yeah. I mean, I get where you're coming from because it resonates when you're saying it like that. It kind of resonates. Coming to the final point, when you look at China as a whole today, right? India, China, US, China. There's pretty much China and everything nowadays. How do you see his ocean strategy? We spoke about the two ocean strategy, which is basically a military strategy and a trade strategy. He also has other interests where he wants to, get into Africa, go into South America, go into this, go into that. And till now, what he had was kind of I won't say a free run, but he had nobody kind of checking on him or uh, keeping a track. Oh, Chinese वहां जा रहा है पकड़ो उसको. Oh, वहां जा रहा है उसको पकड़ो, and this and that. That wasn't there. Today, every move that the Chinese would make would be a problem. I mean, you've got this whole coup belt which has come out in Africa, and Chinese are heavily invested in that area. One, he can't reach there. Two, he's got coups where he doesn't know whether the guy likes him or not. So, how do you see his kind of outreach towards the better half of the world, where he's trying to create some sort of a hook? I mean, for the lack of a better word, he's trying to get his resources, trying to get a hook, trying to get influence. And when he does stuff like this, how do they look at him?
This is a very good question, which has a lot of angles and require a lot of deep thinking. Basically, what is happening to China's ocean strategy? What is happening to it economically? What is happening to it militarily, politically? So there are various angles to the same strategy.
Yeah,
Militarily,
yeah,
as we have discussed, it's facing a huge backlash, but still going on building dual-purpose ports, building on its own, infrastructure, basically. So how is it managing it is through, hitting the left wing countries everywhere. So they know the most of the left wing socialist communist countries are the ones he can reach out easier. Second thing that China is doing is using Russia. Ukraine war has been a big blessing for Russia in terms of for China in terms of bringing Russia into its zone. Russia
yeah.
is heavily dependent on China now. And if now China would say, let's do a exercise in Oman, Russia would come to Oman. China would say, let's do an exercise in Sea of Japan. China is doing that. China, Japan just concluded their naval exercises there. So I think now it has, and also Russia has this kind of influence. The way you're saying about Africa, China has its influence in the Horn Belt of side of Africa. Russia, in the other hand, the Wagner Group, they have the control over entire Sahel, the middle of Africa, Mali, um 2 3 countries. So all these three, the entire Sahel belt, which is called, is now under Russian control. Very pro-Russia they are, because Wagner Group could bring up a huge influence within this. So I think China is not. My point is, China is not only trying to influence these countries all by itself, but now using Russia to its favor a lot in terms of military cooperation, in terms of bringing political influence, ideological influence. I think Russia and China are going on very well together because both need the same thing, both need their presence, both need their ties, and I think they are going on hitting most. So now what we are going to see is, in my mind, is this huge ideological blocks within the world, where we'll see all these leftist countries coming together, all the communist socialist countries. We've already seen Iran, Cuba, Russia, China, North Korea, and fair amount of African, Latin American countries coming into this left wing group. And then you have these huge wave of right wingers coming up, and political leaderships all across Europe, uh, um, and several countries in Asia you have. So I think in the coming time, what we are going to see again, will be back to the history, where we'll have two ideological groups. This time it will not be just US versus Soviet Union, but it would be like a huge group of. I'm just digressing from the topic, but it's necessary to think where it is heading now. So now Russia, China, along with these communist socialist countries versus the strong right wingers, which we are also seeing at the same time. So I think that's the kind of world we are going to look at. And I think these kind of leftist leanings are going to help Russia and China expand, despite the kind of pushover we are seeing by the US and the West. I think that kind of alliance is going to help a lot to in terms of Russia, China. It's another level of, I think, analysis I'm bringing it, but this is what I
Hmm.
can predict.
I must say we've found a topic for our next show. You know, what's happened to the Chinese ocean strategy, and I think we'll have to discuss this a
Yes,
little deeper.
yes, I
So
think
my request is, please kind of note it down, because I'm going to pester you for this. This is a very interesting conversation, because what's happened to the Chinese ocean strategy, and Xi Jinping and the Chinese are not going to sit quiet. So for all the people that are watching, let me be very clear. It's not going to be so that, oh yaar, ab to Xi Jinping chadar daan ke so jayega. ऐसा नहीं होगा. He will come up with something different. He will come up with another breakout somewhere. It may be a frustrated breakout, it may be an armed breakout, it may be a negotiated and a peaceful breakout, which is chances of which, of course, anybody's guess. But what is it that is going to happen to all these investments that the Chinese have made? As we speak, in the past 1 or 2 days, we've had the Chinese premier going to Pakistan and saying, "Oh, CPEC Zindabad" and all that nonsense. What's this future? And CPEC is not a land project; it's an ocean-driven maritime project, actually, which is taking in, this thing to giving China another maritime reach into the Indian Ocean. Let me rephrase that.
correct,
Uh,
correct.
so it's going to be really interesting analyzing that, and I'm going to tell the viewers that we'll come back to you within a week or two with regards to what is actually happening to the Chinese ocean strategy. I'll do a little study, and of course, Madam will also do a little study, so that we can actually I can come up with good questions and she can come up with the best answers. Thank you so much, Dr. Pooja, for coming to the show. It's always a pleasure. Our interactions are light-hearted and they're full of information, and that's something which is the theme where I think learning becomes a little more fun. So, thank you so much for doing that, and till next time. Jai Hind.
Thank you so much.